But have you ever noticed it's during this time of the year that oftentimes the focus is on self, on me? What should I do about me? And the focus is very self-centered. And so as we begin 2021, I want to challenge you with a bigger, a more broad, a better question. And in order to do this, I'm going to go all the way back to the book of Nehemiah. Okay, a couple years back, we actually studied the entire book of Nehemiah. Well, Nehemiah is in the Old Testament. Nehemiah is written in the first person. All right, and so he talks about how he rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. And in Nehemiah chapter 1, beginning at the first verse, it says this: "The words of Nehemiah, son of Hekeliah, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year while I was in the citadel of Susa. Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem." Now, just a couple of quick comments. The month of Kislev. If you were to open up your calendar or your Google Calendar, you'll notice that the month of Kislev is not there. Okay, but in ancient times, the month of Kislev was somewhere in November, December time frame. So the time frame that just passed us. Now, what I love about this is right off the bat, Nehemiah is saying at a particular time, in a particular year, at a particular place, the city of Susa, or the citadel of Susa, which was one of the major Persian cities, one of the premier cities. It would be in modern-day Iran. So this isn't some story that took place a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. This is not made up. I mean, this took place at a particular time in a particular place. He goes on to say, "Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men." Okay, and he questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. Now, just to kind of give you a little bit of background here. Back in these days, Israel was divided, the nation of Israel was divided into two kingdoms. You had the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom, Judah. The Babylonian Empire came in, and they basically destroyed the southern kingdom. They took its inhabitants and made them slaves. It took them into exile. They destroyed the temple. They destroyed the cities. Okay, and so the Babylonians came in. They basically defeated the southern kingdom. Years later, the Persians came in, and they defeated the Babylonians. And so now the Persians are in charge. All right, and finally, King Artaxerxes allows some of the Jewish remnants, those that were taken into exile, to return to Jerusalem. He's allowing the Jewish people to go, or the Israelites to go back into the holy city of Jerusalem. And they begin to live there. And they begin, well, not so much thrive, but here they are. And so here's the report that Nehemiah said. "They said to me, 'Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire.'" And so when these opposing armies came in, they completely and totally destroyed the city. The city did not have its defensive walls, and the inhabitants were now open to further attack. And they were in disgrace. They were in despair. They were overwhelmed. Nehemiah says, "When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven." I mean, I love it. When Nehemiah heard about the condition of Jerusalem and its inhabitants, he sat down and he wept and cried. He fasted and prayed. Now, Nehemiah was a cupbearer. He was a wine taster. And I know many of you out there are thinking, wow, what a cool job. I'd like to have a job like that. You know, and it sounds more glorious than what it was. Okay? What Nehemiah did was basically he drank the wine before the king did. And that way, if someone was trying to assassinate or poison the king, it would poison Nehemiah first. So not as glorious, is it? I mean, he was the last line of defense before the king got poisoned. Well, the book of Nehemiah was written somewhere around 44 BC. The walls of Jerusalem had been torn down for 140 years. The inhabitants of Jerusalem were in despair and hopelessness. They were depressed and overwhelmed, and they were self-centered. And then there's Nehemiah, a cupbearer. Nehemiah was an ordinary, average guy. He had probably never been to Jerusalem. In fact, he lived 1,000 miles away from the holy city. He had probably never seen it, never visited it. He simply heard about it and knew about it. But when Nehemiah heard about the condition of Jerusalem, when he heard about the despair and the disgrace of the people, he was devastated. He was overwhelmed emotionally. He experienced this divine burden, and hence Nehemiah had this motivation. He was motivated to do something about it. In fact, Nehemiah had this Popeye kind of moment. You remember the comic strip Popeye? Actually, it was discovered, created in January of 1929. So we're going to be celebrating the anniversary of Popeye the Sailor Man. Remember, there was Popeye the Sailor Man, his girlfriend Olive Oyl, and who was the antagonist? Who was the bad guy? Yeah, remember Brutus? Okay, Brutus was the antagonist, right? Brutus was always up to no good. He was always picking on Olive Oyl, always causing trouble. And remember, finally, Popeye would reach his limits. He would eat some spinach, his arms would grow, and he had that famous saying, "That's all I can stand, because I can't stand no more." And then he'd go and he'd whoop up on Brutus, and then he would save the day. Well, see, Nehemiah had this Popeye kind of moment. Nehemiah said, somebody has got to do something about this, and it might as well be me. And through this series of events, Nehemiah goes to King Artaxerxes, who allows him to go to Jerusalem with safe passage. And Nehemiah arrives in this ordinary, average kind of guy. He was not a king. He was not a person of great influence. He was an ordinary, average wine taster. He rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem in 52 days. What should have taken years to accomplish, Nehemiah was able to do it in just under 2 months. 52 days. And my friends, once again, he was an ordinary, average kind of guy, just like you and I. And so here's my big question for you. All right, as we enter 2021, what breaks your heart? What breaks your heart? When you look at the world around us, when you look at our nation and our community and our neighborhoods, when you look at the economy and our school system and the schools, when you look at the marriages and children and families, what breaks your heart? I mean, what is it that captures your emotions? What is it that tugs at your heartstrings? What is it when you see it taking place, and it might even be in your own family, that you think to yourself, something needs to change. Something must be done. We just can't let it slide anymore. Something has got to take place. And I think what happens for many of us is we sit back and we think, well, I can't do anything about it. It's always been that way. It's always been like that. And I'm nobody. I don't have the influence. I don't have the wealth. I don't have the power. I mean, I'm not strong enough. I'm not old enough, or I'm too young, too old. I'm not influential enough. I'm disconnected from everybody. I mean, you might even be thinking, yeah, something needs to be done about it, but my best just isn't good enough. And so we become complacent.